Welcome to the Coldplay Culture podcast, where we discuss tech, gaming, health, and the world around us.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Codeplay Culture podcast. Rui and Logan. Today we are joined by Chris Kreuter. And Chris is a jack of many trades who grew up on a steady diet of 80s and 90s science fiction, video games, and drawn to the internet culture. He grew up living his childhood dreams by becoming an engineer and a sci-fi writer. As a writer, he crafts sci-fi novels for kids 8 to 13. And as an engineer, he spent 2 decades as a professional in the public transit industry, focusing on bus and rail vehicles. He also is a host of Chris'll Deal With It, which is a podcast that I personally fell in love with, and I'm working my way from the bottom up because, you don't want to ruin an end to a good, podcasts don't have an end. But also, he is a hockey fan, player, reads a ton of books, and adores podcasts and raises 2 young girls. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm excited.
So today, basically, Chris, I worked my way through, and then I got to episode 5, and then I said I just want to almost talk to him directly, and then basically go back to your pod. It was like an opportunity to be like, hey, I just want to put it out there that all of the stuff that you've added here is incredibly beneficial for every single person listening. I had that same level of vibes of the 4-hour work week of the things that we can immediately implement, right? Today, we're just talking about the whole idea of ideas. I suffer, I think what Rui suffers from and what you suffer from, which is a mild case of you have a lot of ideas and they're good ones, right? And they're pretty much all worth doing. So we're talking about ROI and prioritization and different categories. Is there some tools that you use to if you have an idea, do you write it down right away? And then do you use certain categories to say, oh, that's a personal one with my family and that has a priority? What are some methods and some tools?
Yeah, no. So for me, it's very much having an idea capture system. I did a whole episode on just the systems that you can use to have that. Just whatever works for you, right? Some people want a pen and paper. Some people, I use Notion particularly. I used to use Trello for many years. For me, Notion was great because it's more free form because my ideas fall in so many different categories. It could be a podcast. It could be a novel idea I'm writing on. Just an idea for a name of a character because I heard something silly walking down the street. So ideas can come in so many different, not just formats, but flavors. It could be a small thing, a big thing. So just having one big bucket that I can evaluate. And for me, part of the system is just time, right? It's saying, okay, great example, the new novel I just started writing. It took me a few months to get to that because I had lots of great ideas for what to write a book about, but none of them really stuck. Do I really want to spend 2 years of my life writing this? No. Kind of wait. When the idea sticks in your mind, you can't stop thinking about it. That's when you have this kind of momentum. This is an idea that's going to stick. And then you start taking these other things, other ideas, maybe from totally separate fields or thoughts and ideas, and you start building up that case for a project. So the system is very much about what goes on inside your head as much as what tools you use. But time is a big factor in that for me.
Right.
It's a real broad brush, but
yeah, the ROI on time versus money. Time is the only finite resource, meaning that we could have infinite fictitious currency or whatever, but unless you can add more, have you seen that Justin Timberlake movie In Time where it's the currency? That's worth seeing, where you would basically see Jeff Bezos's arm and it would be a bunch of numbers on it. And if he pays for things by touching, and then once you're out of time, you die instantly, right? It's a whole time and money thing of that's a good way of looking at it for ROI, because people say ROI conceptually as investment, as in financial, even though investment could be taken as time investment, right? But people, I think, just off the top of their head think of ROI as financial. But if you think about it as time being the ultimate currency, then if I'm going to put this in my life for 2 years, a book, I have all the ideas. What is does it give me time back, or is time the resource I want? So it's almost like identifying what is the proper ROI measure, like whether it's time, money, or whatever it is, and then prioritizing that.
Well, so the two buckets, right? Are you talking about the R? Or are you talking about the I? Right.
That's true too.
Are you focusing on the returns? Are you focusing on the investment you're putting into it?
Yes, because those are like two individual buckets that could be either or, like an investment currency in, currency out, time in, currency out. It's like a standard formula for
time in, time out. There's lots of ways.
Yeah.
When it comes to time and investment, there's nothing worth your time. That to me is like the most valuable resource. So everything should be put aside for, in regards to our time, right? We have to kind of cherish that. That should be the top layer of the of whatever chain that is.
Yeah, like for example, ask yourself, hey, this 2 days of, let's say we're coding something, Rui, and we lock our doors and we tell our kiddos that like, we will not see you for 2 days. Yeah, I'll be in the basement, but it'll be like whatever. Like whatever it is, we ask ourselves like, hey, is it worth the time investment away from ultimately the kids? Right. Because that's where I bring it down to. It never is. And I even feel guilty sometimes. I'm like going to, skate park. I'm like, if I bring but if I don't bring, my daughter, I'm like, I should really always be with them. But then bringing it back rationally, I'm on that one of those tangents. It's like working from home, you see them way more than if you went in the office. So like, all things being considered, I see them a lot more than, how I saw my dad or whatever. But like, so one of the questions for, ideas for return on investment is like, what is your most valuable asset or what you're trying to maximize? Like if you're financially set and you don't need the money, maybe you don't really can sit. You're just like, hey, wake up every day. If you can do whatever you want, what would that look like? Maybe starting there. And then that kind of piggybacks into like your most important return, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think it depends a lot on how you're defining the return too, right? If you try to use it in terms of, there are certain tasks and ideas that, hey, listen, if I code this and it'll save me 15 minutes a day, there's a definitive return on investment. All right. If it take me 50 hours to code that, like, is it worth it? Whereas a 5-minute code fix, all of a sudden, boom, 15 minutes a day back in my day. There's a very clear delineation. But, for me, it would, for certain, like, especially creative projects, even work related ones. I mean, I work to live, right? I work to provide for my family. But, with the projects, if you go into it just to make a lot of money, it's usually not going to work out. There are very few authors that are full-time writers, just the way it is, right? I used to be a board game publisher. The same thing. The joke was the best way to make a small fortune in board games to start with a large fortune. Like that was just like running. It wasn't even a joke, really. It was reality. But if you're creating these,
has a monopoly or whatever. So there's the word monopoly.
There's exceptions to every rule. There's returns that you're not going to expect, right?
Right.
I published board games, but like I learned graphic design through that process. Like you don't realize it until years later. But the reason you might go into a project, it might be to leave the best parts of yourself behind for the future.
Of course.
Right? Oh, yeah, that's true. So like passion first, right? Like you have to be passionate about the time investment or it's just kind of prison. Yeah.
Yeah. And I can go into a project, like I'm going to put my best thought out there, like the podcast, like, I want to put this thought out there to help people, but like I realize as you're going into it, you're actually building up on something, and that return can take different forms over a longer time scale. And you have to kind of get comfortable with the fact that you're not going to see all the possible returns.
Yes, for sure.
So if you go into it saying, okay, well, what's your minimum viable threshold for a successful ROI? Like, it has to be at least something in it tangible in the near future to keep the momentum going on the project, right? If I was doing it just based on views, I would have stopped at episode 3 or 4. Right. This isn't successful, right? If I said, no, I'm going to build up to something, I'm going to learn this craft, and it's going to take I know, because I'm not great at marketing. It's my biggest flaw, right? I'm going to learn this process. I'm going to work on my podcast game. I'm going to find my voice, and also like the content that I'm building, like I can take that and then put it into a book or something down the road. Like I'm realizing there's more avenues I can take it the more I practice and get good at a skill. So not everything has to have this concrete, like I have to make this or it's going to be a failure.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yes. I do the same thing. I blindly hide behind my intentions, and I have a whole like idea about this thing called GP or God points, where it's like kind of like it's just almost like a word for karma, right? So if you like what you're doing and what we're doing right now is we're putting this out, like, you know, view counts on ours is very, very, very low. We love doing it, right, Rui and I, and like, and we're doing it with the sole intent of helping others, right? And this podcast here, like, granted, there's no, you know, we have a clean, like, nothing said that, you know, that will generate negative GP. Like, this will give us one each, okay? And you can imagine it's like a video game. In the corner, you did something nice, you helped an old lady across the street, you got one GP, right? But GP is interesting because you can't spend it. It will spend on its own in the weirdest ways. You can't go and just take out 10 and like get a Ferrari or whatever it is, right? It just auto spends, and it's infectious and grows over time and establishes this positive culture. I realized that, like, okay, well, when I die and the kids are like checking out YouTube, like, I want it to be a whole bunch of like how to do this. And it's basically just that whole, okay, technology tough, right? So here's an easy way to do this, giving people time back so they can be with their families, so they can be more efficient and all of that stuff. But I'll often find it's kind of interesting to think if there was like an overlay, just like an AR overlay in the world, be like, oh, that guy just lost 10 GP. What did he do? Like, I think he just threw something at his mom. Like, oh, God. Like it would be a kind of a better, like, Elon should turn that on for this simulation, like as soon as whatever. But that'd be kind of cool to make more of a video game like aspect of reality in some way to, like, you know.
Yeah, but then you're also getting that filtered through other people's perceptions too, right? I get this a lot, like, oh, like, you know, writing a book is a lot. I'm like, yeah, I know. And when they hear what I get out of it, it's almost like, well, that's a lot of work to get that. I'm like, well, that's what matters to me, right?
Yeah.
Like the example of the AR overlay, right? Like, maybe he threw something at his mom because his mom threw it at him, right? Like, there could be a context that you don't know, and you know, everyone's going to see it through a different lens, and so, you know, there are some people. For sure.
It would cause hate for sure, an AI overlay, because if you show bank accounts, like, or see the ups and downs of like karma, like, right, like that, it would just cause divisions, I think. And
that's human nature, man. That's human nature, no matter what.
Exactly.
That's human nature. But going back to the primary motivator. So I self-published a book on Amazon KDP, and my only motivator for publishing this self-publishing this book was to leave for my son. It was a book on how to teach kids how to speak in Latin as cartoon characters. That was my only motivator. It was just for that reason alone. Anything else is just a byproduct of that. So that was my a little bit, yeah.
That's awesome.
Not super fluent, but I can easily get by and have a conversation, yeah. Awesome. And I want my son to learn the language too, right? And I'm hoping through the book, so he's interested, and that book got him interested. So it was a stepping stone. Obviously, it's a little kid's book, and the words are very basic, but that was my motivator.
And you reviewed Luna,
thanks,
right?
Luna learns Latin,
and that's what I named my Tesla, like Luna. And then, like, anyhow, what? And I hate saying that word, but like, because it's all black, it's like the cat from Sailor Moon or whatever, I think. But I love that word, Luna. I often wanted to have some kind of like a dark gothic chart-based web app called Luna, which just the crescent moon was like half a pie chart with some kind of like simple UX. But like marketing that's like pretty straightforward. Like, I love that word, Luna.
It just means moon in Latin, right?
Okay, yeah,
that's how you say moon in Latin. Yeah,
one of my kids has that as their name, part of their name. So,
there we go. Now all the, I guess that sliver, crescents are now connected, and now it's a full moon because it's like three come together. It's like 1/3. There's my fraction joke or whatever. Help bring me back because I'm like gone at this point.
You got a third of a chuckle, so that's good.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. I got the social. But yeah, so Latin.
Yeah, going back to the motivators. Yeah, that's my motivator. I want to leave something, to your point, Logan, too. You want to leave something behind for your kids to see. Say, this is this is how to's, or this is what my dad left, and something for them when you're not on this planet anymore, and maybe for your grandkids too, of course.
Yeah. So figure out what your primary like return will be. Like
Right.
hopefully it's happiness, right? Why do you do that? Because you want to be happy. And actually, the more happy you get, like a skateboard, I fall, I break stuff or whatever. I'm like, it's very hard to go to. I got into it because I'm like nervous as heck, and I wanted some exposure therapy. And then I just fell in love with, I guess, getting over fears, if that makes sense, or an introvert becoming an extrovert. It's the same reason, right, Chris? Like you love writing. It's your passion. When you put together probably like just even like a 7-word sentence that is like so packed with information, like phonically, and like it's like understood. It's such an art. I can't even imagine how that passion could feel. But when you write, like you're in the zone, you love it. It brings ROI back to your life when you're happier through expression of your art.
Yeah, but there's times where it sucks, right? I think it also part of this is, what are the stakes, right? I mean, when I write, I can write and put my best thought out there, and I can take the time to edit it down, right? There's not food on a family's table doesn't ride on how well of a sentence I write. The better a sentence, like, maybe it'll pay more dividends. I want to put my best thought out there, and that's the motivator. But if I had to write for a living, I would write a very different way, right? I'd be writing very different books. I'd be ghostwriting. I'd be doing, and it would cease to be a passion, right?
Yeah.
Or it runs the risk, right? When the stakes are different. So I think part of the ROI on any idea, it's what are the stakes? Could distributing this idea be damaging to society? Could it be damaging to a reputation? It could be as simple as, like, I have an idea to write this social media post that 3 years later stops me from getting a job, right?
Yeah.
It could be, there's lots of stakes that have to factor into that math. It's not always an equation, but
yeah. My daughter's actively, and my son too, they're actively practicing kindness, which I don't really push them into that, but that's something that they try to work on, which is like humbling as heck. But sometimes they will say things that are very kind to one. And I say, hey, did you notice that when you said that, it might have been inferred by this person like this, even though you're complimenting that person? The whole idea of this is really nice. So you're not going to think of the splash damage effect, right? You want to think of something as do no harm. Don't be like, oh, it's good for that person. Oh, it's harming everyone else around. It's very interesting to think of that. It's very, or is the, like, I meditate. I'm like a secular Buddhist, so I don't practice any of that stuff. I'm not like religious. I just meditate. But one of the cool quotes was like, they try to wake up, get to the end of the day by not hurting something. It's impossible. So if you don't get out of your room, someone will be upset that they think that you're upset at them. You can't hide from it. You just have to try to harm reduction or have less harmful speech. That's the whole thing of, like, is what you're doing good for everyone? Does it have the least harm? Is it making you most happy? And I think that it's just an equation. Like, it's not I don't think it's a pie in the sky thing that can't be put mathematically expressed. Like, I think maximum, like what we're talking about here for cause, I don't know, but I don't think maybe there's a lot of equations that factor in harm reduction of like that kind of stuff. But like, if you think about it, you just add up the totals and, like, say this one is great. Everyone gets time back. No one gets harmed. It's ethical. It won't take too long to do it. And I'm going to have a fun time doing it as well. Like, that seems like that could be an idea that I would prioritize. It's like it's cyclical in its reference. But yeah, so, like, do you ever weigh by category? Because I always have guilt of, like, oh, working too much. I should be with the family, or I'm I should, or I've been with the family too much. I should, like all of this. You ever have the guilt between categories where I'm like, oh, I haven't helped out in that. It's very difficult to like, you have to provide, but at the same time, when you provide, you don't provide. You don't provide your presence, but you provide your.
I mean, I think it's also understanding the time scale, right? There's times we have to be opportunistic. You can't always predict where you're going to, especially when you have kids, right? You can't predict how you're going to be able to spend your time or what's going to happen. You can have someone be sick, something can come up. So, one project can all of a sudden go off the rails, and you're dedicated to that. So you have to maintain flexibility if you're working on multiple ideas.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's also understanding how flexible would an idea be, right? If your idea is to become the world's greatest skateboarder, well, you better be setting aside multiple hours per day to be getting better. Like you just the only way to get better is to do the thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you want to try to set like expectations. Okay, well, getting into a writing habit, but if you say if I don't write 1,000 words a day, I'm a failure. Like that's not achievable. There's more to writing than just putting words on paper. I can write 1,000 words in a second. Okay, it's 1,000 words. They're garbage. So it depends on if there's more of an art to it. Is it something where you just have to put in the time, the 10,000 hours or whatever, to get better at something?
Yeah.
But understanding that, all right, I can fit this into my other commitments. It can be flexible, but it might be something where there's phases of a project where that commitment looks different. Like right now, it's a lot of like for the last month or so, it's been idea generation for the writing. Right, I had to figure out the plot, figure out the characters, figure out. I have to do a deep dive into blockchain. I actually need someone who actually knows Latin for part of this project, right? So like,
nice.
You start pulling in resources, your brain starts thinking a little bit differently because you're making connections that you've never made before in the context of your project.
Mm-hmm.
And so that phase one, and then you get to the actual writing, you're taking advantage of that research, but you can be a little more. There's no fine line of exactly when you have to do that unless there's a stake involved. Like I need to have a novel to my agent by this date. Like your process is so different.
Yeah.
But I mean, do you guys have similar sorts of systems? I mean, I know I'm talking from a very literary standpoint, but this could apply from other types of projects.
Yes.
How do you make those scale determinations?
I honestly, it's hard to quantify, scale. I do get obsessed when I do something, and I always see it through until it's done. I get obsessed, and my scale is basically, it's a roller coaster. There's no, it's just up and down, man. It's
I like that
the
idea of
obsession just
though.
takes me. Right.
That's a great way to phrase it. Sometimes you just can't let it go. Like,
yeah, I'm that kind of person. It's my personality, but I always wonder, like, how do you write for a wider audience to like get that ROI when you're writing, right? Because isn't there like a creative barrier when you're thinking about return on investment when it comes to writing?
there can be. I think
Like,
it's what stops a lot of people from thinking they can't do something. They're like, again, their definition of success is based on, and I think it's become harder because we're in this era now where everyone's surrounded by experts. You can go to YouTube right now and find and hear directly from the world's greatest writers, and it can be a limiter if you feel like, all right, well, I'm not going to be able to write the great American novel, and it stops you right dead in your tracks.
right.
So you also have to realize where you are with this skill, right? The book I'm starting to write now is going to be better than the first books that I end up self-publishing because I couldn't get an agent. Like now, book 5 is going to be better than book 1. It doesn't make book 1 any worse, right? And there's nothing stopping you from going back and rewriting, but then you're perpetually editing. Like, what are you trying to create? It's almost like I can see my progression as a writer from the first Rainy River Bees book in 2016 through to the first one I published anyway, right? And it took me 10 years to get to that point.
Right.
So I don't know if it's a really great answer to your question per se, but I think you want to at least think about the commitments that you're making. Right. It takes a lot to write a full book. Right. And if I really wanted to be a writer, but I wanted maybe a quicker iterative process, there's a lot of writers that'll start with short stories, work up to a novella length, right? Which is like 20 to 40,000 words, which is now a burgeoning market that really wasn't there 10 years ago, 20 years ago. It might be something where I prefer to write at novel length because I can really, I like having a spread out plot. I like having I'm an engineer by trade, right? So for me, I can visualize. I need to see the whole thing, and I
Right.
like to really pack a lot into that.
Mhm.
Short stories I've struggled with because even though I can write good sentences, but maybe I'll revisit it at some point. It's just I prefer to do it over more time. Quality over quantity,
Mhm.
but it's a personal choice.
Right. Yeah, short stories are a bit challenging, right? To get them good and to get them right in such a short span, right?
Yeah,
Um,
and it's not really a tangible product, and not that I'm in
mhm,
it to making money, but I like to produce something. I have a lot of friends that are very prolific short story writers. Like trying to go find the one issue of this magazine that came out this 1 month that has small print run to read this story, or they're posting it online where they're not. It's not. There's no real avenue for that to generate a lot of revenue.
mhm,
It may get them critical acclaim, which then might get them an agent, which might and they'll get some pro
Mm.
rates, but it's very short term. But if you're
right.
building a career, and listen, if I had to make money being a writer, I pursue other avenues like that. For me, it's
Mhm,
not about making money. It's like my best thought comes out better in a longer format.
yeah.
I know I can
I
be a
would
little
say
long winded.
with the YouTube shorts, for example, the 16.6 million video that I had, that was just by chance luck. It blew up. They pushed it. It went into like an online magazine. I was super humbled. I asked the kids, hey, can I please keep this up? Is this okay? Check with your, it was like, it was all kindness. It was all accidental. That took subscribers on YouTube shorts from like I think 100 to 20,000, right? But the money that I got from 16.6 million was about $600 over um, probably a year, right? But now if I have one video that's how to put a SIM card into a laptop, and that's 1.2 million views, long-term content, as opposed to a short. Getting back to
Mhm,
short stories and long form, and that
yeah.
video alone, I think, has brought in like I would say 6 grand in revenue, and it's like $1 grand a year, right?
Nice.
So I would say that, if it's relatable, the long form content is really good for learning and actually expressing a well thought out something that would be helpful. And
Mhm,
then the short one is good for a quick audience gain, like almost like
yeah.
viral ability, or like, and if you pop viral for kindness, you're so blessed, because I tried after to do like, it's like, no, and I ended up deleting all of these videos because I'm like, can I do that again? It's like, no, it happened because it just happened. And that's it.
Mhm,
If you chase it, you're going to be one of those island boys, or not if there's anything wrong with that. I'm just that's always chasing view count. And like, I don't want, that's very toxic, that kind of culture of that. I'm like, but I can tell you, like, when that pop happens and you're, getting calls from random people like, hey, I saw your thing, is like, it is very addictive. So you can see how
mhm,
that could like, psychologically damage someone if it continues to happen, like down like some
right.
kind of what path. But I think it very true for yours. Like short stories, like you said, will probably pop for the audience a lot, but then it won't actually have long term. Um, and yeah, on that account, that 20,000, I lose 100 every single week, so it's gone down to 18,000, and I'm like, I realized why. It's because that's how it works. It's like, if you're
Mhm,
not, and then it will continue to go down because of whatever, but there's no real, it's, yeah, it's weird that it'll pop up. I had a couple on TikTok that went, from 100 to now 25,000. And then it went up to 45,000. And then it went down to 41, and it stayed there. So I'm like, okay,
mhm.
either they
Well,
hid the unsubscribe button in like that in the UI on that, versus it's easier in YouTube. But yeah,
yeah, I mean,
weird how smart thing.
I've changed my expectations from certain, especially with the marketing. Right, there's elements of projects that that's marketing. I don't like having to go out and promote the books. Like, I'm not running around
Mhm.
trying to pitch my book to every single person. Like, I
Yeah.
self-publish it. It's out there. You can go buy it on all these different channels. I've made it available. But I had so many people giving us advice. We got to get on social media. You got to spend 2 hours a day. I'm like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I'm chasing this like virality, and I'm getting content. I made some great connections because of it, but I'm like, I'm investing too much of my time. Like my goal here is to become a better writer, get more of my thoughts out in the world. Like, if I die soon, like the next day, year, month, whatever, like I want to keep producing great content. And maybe that means that I'm not selling as many books. I know I'm not selling as many books because I'm not out there on social media. It's probably stopping me from getting the literary agent as quickly as I'd probably like. But I'd rather find the right person, treat people the right way over a long enough time scale, good things will happen. But all the hours I could have put on social media since I launched, and I was on Instagram and all that stuff for a while, and I did it. And it's a time and money suck. There was no return on that investment.
It is.
For sure.
It is.
So, but it was also the type of content I was creating. That my intent, like my original goal was to get my best thought out there in the world. It wasn't to make a ton of money. Again, if it was to make a ton of money, I would marketing very different. The whole framework I'd use to make that determination, I'm going to get off social media and just focus on writing. And for me, that was a good trade-off. And that's what works for me. Yeah. But you may also want to look at, going back to the ROI, the topic of the pod is the investments don't always have to be your own, right? If you understand the scope of an idea, like this idea is great. I know I can get this idea 80% of the way there. To get it to 100, I'm going to need help in this area, right? Whether it be I need some help with coding, I need some help with marketing. So I know I'm going to have to invest a different resource, time, usually money, right? Or time if I was going to do it myself. Like, hey, I could spend 5 hours a month or a week doing the marketing for this, or I can just pay somebody and not have that burden. And like, I could spend those 5 hours doing this other idea or making the product better. Because I think taking the idea and breaking it out into all of its components and really taking a strong evaluation before you get started. You can reevaluate and change on the fly, but like before I go into a book, I'm like, listen, like, do I want to spend 2 years writing this? The intent of this one is, hey, this is your level up. Like the one I just finished, like I gave it to people like I do every other book, and like, hey, this is your level up novel. Don't self-publish this one. All right, well, like that changed my framework. I'm going to have to go in and build a system now and put time and effort into finding a literary agent. And that's a very different type of task. But it's part of being an author. It's part of taking that next step. But I wouldn't be at that step if I hadn't had the mindset that I had of, let me just write good stuff. I know I keep coming back to the literary side. This is more general on ideas, so I don't want to. I think it's true of any idea, like the podcast, right? You guys had this, so maybe you guys talk a bit about how you had the idea for the podcast and why you decided to pull the trigger.
That's a great question, Rui. It was your idea for the longest time, and I had it too, but we never talked about it for probably a year. We never knew.
Right. It was almost like that Seinfeld realization where they're sitting in the coffee shop and they're talking about a show about nothing, and this is the show. So we were in your basement and we were just, talking, and we kind of talked about doing a podcast. This could be a podcast. This is a podcast. What's the podcast about? This is what it's about, right? So it's like that Seinfeld moment we had. So that's when it started. What, a year ago now? Was it?
Yeah. And you had, you were just like, you've been wanting to do it for a long time. It's like, I've been wanting to, it's like, I didn't want to ask you because I know how hard we're both working in all of the different areas. I was like, I felt guilty. I was like, no, I don't. But like, it's like, I'm so glad you brought it up. Right. Like I have been, it's been marinating in my head as an idea for so long. Because of the things that we talk about, it should not be like in a vacuum. It could help other people, right?
Right. Plus, it helps me. Like, I'm not the best public speaker, or I'm not the best on camera or microphone. So this kind of helps me. It's been helping me, learn how to properly speak on camera on a microphone. I typically wouldn't. I would avoid all this, right? So it's kind of getting me out of my shell, so to speak.
It's like you're skateboarding.
Yeah, skateboarding, man. As soon as I got on that skateboard at your place, man, that was awesome.
That
was my first time on a board.
I got a surprise for you, but now that I've said that, it's not a surprise, but surprise. But anyways, like, well, that's like very cryptic, but I think like but dude, I was like watching. I was like, wow, you're actually like legit liking that. I was like, oh my
It
god,
was fun, man.
it's crazy to think of. Uh, okay, so can we bring me back down to earth, Chris, if I go off? But like, can we blindly agree that if you just focus on the money, you'll never do what you want, you'll never be happy? Like if you woke up, if everyone just on the planet, boom, 10 million US dollars in their account, they never have to do anything, they're set. And they're like, oh, I can do anything I want every day for the rest of my life. If you mentally like metaphorically put yourself in that place and start there, like it was true, and then, write for passion, skateboard for passion, everything that you do for passion, really. I know you have many, but is that not the formula for true happiness? Like we shouldn't judge the ROI on like what makes sense from capitalism perspective, right? Like none of that stuff is actually like it's good for them or whatever. It makes money, whatever that means. It doesn't make anyone happier, healthier, better. Like if it's not,
Right.
like is that a good blind statement, or is that just too grandiose to be that?
I think it's funny because I've had this conversation a lot. It's like I would love for Disney, I guess Disney owns Marvel. No, Disney owns everybody. I'd love for a big Hollywood studio to come up to me and say, "Hey, we want to turn the Rainy River Beast trilogy to movies." Great, pull up the Brinks truck. Because it's gonna. I'm all for the capitalism side of it. Like it'd be great for a sudden ROI that didn't return on that investment of time I spent, right?
Yeah.
But I'd only get there if I treating people the right way over a long enough time scale, right? If I could be at an event and I could be, this kid can ask me a question I don't really like, and I could just kind of blow it off. And you don't know, that person was sitting in the room. Or I could take my time and focus on the one kid with my original intention, and he overhears that and sees the passion, right? You never know who's looking or who's watching. So,
Right.
but if you do it because you're trying to just look good, which I think is a lot of social media, it's not
exactly
job done.
For sure.
Just be honest, be yourself, be true to yourself, and that's why I've pushed back on the social media side, not to revisit that. But going back to the Brinks truck for the movie yes, money is good. I could do more things in my family. That would be a huge level up for my career and give me the opportunity to work on more ambitious projects because I'd have more time to devote to this passion that I have. Right? It's a side hustle. Like it's getting up at 5:15 in the morning to write for an hour before the kids wake up. But so being able to do that more would be awesome. But more importantly, one of the best pieces of myself, right? Again, I'll go back to the first Rainy River Beast book, which is as much my love letter to hockey as the book I would have loved as a 9 or 10-year-old kid. I had a lot of deep-seated reasons for writing that novel. It's going to go influence so many more kids. That's above the money. And it's a nice thing to say, but it's truly how I feel. And again, that's my lens. That's not somebody else's. Again, the money is great because it empowers and enables other things.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
It's like a gift. Great power comes great responsibility.
But also, again, the time scale, right? Like for me, like I'd love to be able to retire from my day job, but I don't feel like I'm ever going to. What's great, it depends on what you're doing, right? If you're a skateboarder, I think when you're 80, 85, it's going to be hard to do. I mean, Tony Hawk's kind of setting the bar pretty high.
Yep.
But like, I got just but writing certain your ideas can shift as you get older, but it's kind of the one creative thing that's really stuck. I mean, it's been 15 years of this, but it's something I can do when I'm 90, 95, if I'm lucky enough to live that long.
Yes, because the body deteriorates a little bit faster than the mind.
I want to continue to get better and improve as a writer, and not everyone gets that opportunity. So even now, like, again, why I'm more choosy about my ideas right now is saying, listen, let's assume this is the last book I ever get to write. If I'm lucky enough to live long to finish this book, go through all the editing revisions, all the hard work, let me pretend this is the last book. So out of all the ideas and things I had like, all right, this is the one that this is a message I want to say, and there's a lot more passion behind it. And like, this is the one I'm writing. This is my last book. Now, when I'm done with that one, I'm going to do that again. If this is going to be my last book? What do I want to put into the world?
Should I get hit by a bus? Do you have, what is it called? Not a mantra, but like do you use like an affirmation like that going into anything? Like, for example, this is the last customer interaction I'll ever have before I get hit by, or this is the last. I know they say live every day like it's last, but that's too vague to actually be impactful, where you're like, you could almost like, not mantra, what's it called? Affirm that you're like, this is going to be like the last thing that I will do as a project, as a whatever, to leave my legacy. So like, imagine that conversation with that kid, right? You're saying hypothetically, this will be the last thing that I say to a human, right? It's like, basically, this is the last time. It's so motivational to think of it like that, because you're like, but also it's pretty burdening on you to always think, holy crap, I have to put everything into this. Like,
Yeah, I think there's definitely a whole sidetrack that you can go down in terms of stoicism, in terms of a philosophy and approach towards life.
Right.
Yeah. But I think in terms of mantra, the word I use is principles.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually doing a whole series on not to keep plugging my podcast, but I'm in the middle of my summer series of, like, I went through a process a few years ago of wanting to reevaluate my life and what I was spending my time on, right? What framework am I using for things like ROI, or what do I pursue as an idea? What framework am I using for my years, months, quarter, whatever you want to do, right? But it really boils down to all I have is a code of principles, and these 13 principles have stuck with me. I changed the last one time. They've really stuck, and it just enables me to say, listen, these are aspirational on a day-to-day basis. Like, I can be a jerk sometimes. Like, I'll have my moments where I don't live up to that principle, but if I regularly remind myself, I will continue to improve. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So one of them is just create beneficial things with passion. It's
Right.
vague enough where you don't feel like I have to, I have to be stoic. I have to be perfect. I have to treat every person like it's the last time I'm ever going to see them, because that there is a deep end there.
Mm-hmm.
But I have this mentality that can mold to. It's a framework to help me make decisions, but it's also a framework to help me finish things.
Yeah.
Or give me permission to change course.
Mm-hmm.
But
like to be like susceptible to interruption without, like breaking flow and like all of that stuff.
Yeah, but it's also how well your skills developed, right? I mean, just to go back to, for me, it's like, let's say from a listener's perspective, right? There might be a listener who has always dreamt about writing a novel, right? If you go into the expectation that, listen, just write the book. Writers write. Don't use somebody else's framework for success, right? And after you write that book, try editing. Like, by going through the process and putting yourself out there a bit, you start making connections with people that give you more perspective, right? A lot of what I'm saying now, 15 years in, I'm regurgitating input from hundreds, if not thousands of people, whether it be a beta reader, whether it be a mentor, whether it be someone I heard talk at a panel at a recent convention, right? Like the phrase, writing is my best thought, is so central to me as a writer now, but I heard it from my mentor, one of my best friends, and whose career is skyrocketing. And it's been great to see. And you get bits and pieces from people as you do things. So understand, for our virtual listener here, like, your return on investment right now on this first project might be really small. You did a thing. Congratulations. It might suck.
Right.
It's okay. You wrote a thing. Now it's a stepping stone. Exactly. And if you're still passionate about it, and if your principles, from my frame, if my principles are aligned with what I'm doing, I should have a very healthy mental framework to continue on that path, or decide, what, I wrote the thing and I hated it. I hated the process. I don't like editing. I don't like marketing, whatever it is. I don't like skateboarding, right? Or you fall in love with it, and all of a sudden,
we'll see about that. We'll see about that. Put one underneath your feet.
But again, podcasting, right? It's kind of addictive, but there's a reason why. What's the percentage? Like 90% of podcasts fail within the first 10 episodes or something. There's got to be a stat out there about how many
there is. Yeah. And
I wonder
those
why
are probably
why
people that do it for money. Yeah, they do it for money. Like, why do things fail? Because they're doing it for money.
Right.
Because if you have enough money to and it's not taking enough time, like an hour a day, like Rui and I, like we look so forward to this because we could just be ourselves. We could talk to some amazing people, like, and we're like, this is like the highlight. Like we grab our coffee, it was like, it's just us, you know? And,
absolutely.
And this will go on indefinitely, you know, knock on wood, because I love this pod, because we love doing it and it's not work. It's like, so what would, you know, start in a place where you're loving the journey, not the destination. And just, you know, every day I was like, I quit skateboarding as a kid because I was focused on sponsors and getting better in magazines and stuff. I was like, this is just awful. I hate it. And then I got back into it as an adult and far surpassed my skill level as a kid that was sponsored. Granted, there's no sponsor. I'm not seeking that. I don't want that. I don't like, I might actively, you know, if that ever, I probably wouldn't, unless I could give it back to someone else, like as a weird way of like deflecting, you know, considering that situation. But like, I don't, when I skate, I don't even have a goal. I'm like, I'm going to ride around, whatever happens, happens. But the kids are, because they're focused on getting good, they get hyper fixated on a certain maneuver and they bear down and get tunnel vision. And because that's very tight and constrictive, like both in cardiovascular wise for the cortisol and the certain mechanical movements of your body for that particular maneuver, which aren't counterbalanced with the antagonist of those movements, meaning that like the left side of their body is going to get really tired fast from that trick. They end up hurting themselves and spraining their ankles and not hydrating it. And that hyperfixation of wanting, or I call it like skate greed, when they're like, I want to learn, I want to get better. Right. I'm like,
or I want this
I'm like,
5-second YouTube clip to be successful. So I'm going to do it 500 takes.
Exactly.
Right.
I just skate around. If there's an obstacle in the way, I'll do something. And I'm just having fun, man. It's just like headphones on. I'm like, it is literally bliss. No goals, no intention. And like, yeah, it's super good. Like the journey part is really important. Do you love this moment? I love this moment. I'm so happy that Chris came on, and you know, Rui, and like this is the highlight of. And we got sad a little bit because we weren't able to do it for a couple weeks because, you know, schedules and all that stuff. Right now we have like 6 episodes that haven't been uploaded, so a little bit backlogged, but it doesn't matter. None of that stuff matters. It's just this interaction. Like we can post it, it'll be out. None of that stuff matters. It really matters that we love the time and the journey and the conversation.
Yeah, but listen, it's not to say that, listen, 5 years from now, there could be an opportunity where you guys are doing this professionally, where you're going to have more of a structure around what you do. You're going to build better systems or tighter systems to make sure, all right, we're going to have this episode on Tuesday, this on Thursday, this one on Friday. And there's some elite level podcasters out there. It's their job and they do a wonderful thing and they add a lot of value to the world because they have a bigger platform. You know, this, like even for your podcast, my podcast, it doesn't matter. Like, it can morph into something else. It can just become it could just continue to grow. It could just continue to be a passion project. And you build a small tribe of people. Like, not everything has to be this globe spanning thing, right? We have 4,000 television channels as opposed to 4 when our grandparents were alive, or in my case alive, but in many cases like when they were the 40s and 50s. What was it, 4 channels?
Yeah. And you had to like, you had to do this thing. And you had to get up, right? There's no remote control. And then you got to slap it on the side and it's good then.
But there was a collective, like, all right, there's a lot of gatekeepers, things like that. So we live in this new era, this new culture where I think we have to all get comfortable with, like, your return on investment is not that you're not going to be the next J.K. Rowling, right? That gets lucky with with Harry Potter because it's cultural phenomenon. You just never know. Your viral video.
Right.
But you know, I had a kid come up to me last week that got my book and read it and said, "Hey, I love this book so much. How do you like?" He was so passionate about it. I'm like, "Wow, cool! I really influenced it." Kid knew nothing about hockey, and now all of a sudden is looking into hockey history. Like, wow, like my love letter to hockey that I wrote for 9-year-old me got to get this kid excited about the sport that's given me so much joy in my life, and that was better. You could have given me $1,000 check to buy my books. That kid's interaction meant more to me, right? If someone wants to give me $1,000 for the books, I'm happy to do it. But like,
yeah. Let's make that clear.
In terms of like the actual like human, like the return, like it gave me so much fuel. And honestly, at the time, I kind of really needed it because I was in a creative rut. Right? There was a multi-month process of getting from like editing the last book, starting the agent pitch to starting this one was like the biggest gap I've ever had, and it sucked.
Passion projects are key, man. They're so important.
But you have
even
to be ready
for
for it.
our mental well-being, right? We need that creative outlet to kind of fall back on. Can't just once it becomes a job, this podcast, once it becomes a job, we'll have a side cast talking about like video
Yeah.
games and stuff, right?
Yeah,
You
we'll be
need
like,
that
okay, we
creative.
gotta like. I wonder if that point that if everything gets popular, because we have to like not cater to capitalism in such a way because it's
Mhm.
the dominant whatever we have. So like maybe if it becomes naturally organically grows as something that comes something you don't like, you sell it at that point. Maybe that's like a
Right.
good out. You're like, oh, that pod, like it got way too popular. I sold that, like, and then you take that money to do like the side stuff you love.
No.
Maybe that's
Sell
like
it all the time.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah. Oh, it got popular. I didn't want to do it. That's why. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. But you know what? If it ever does get popular and becomes a job, that's perfectly fine. I'd rather be doing this than you know,
Yeah.
mining coal or whatever I
Yeah.
do for a living.
Yeah. Maybe
Yeah,
with
no,
like an RTX getting Ethereum mining that, but
Oh, right.
probably
but I
not
think
coal.
it's like Rui, it's a great point though. I think that we've talked a lot about the creative side of things, but I think even in our day jobs, like there is a certain amount of what any of us, most of us do with our day to day that's not sexy.
Hmm.
That's just it can seem rote, it can seem mundane. I
Right.
think you have to find the value. I think you can change your mindset. Like it may be looking over a longer time scale. It might be looking at the impact you're having on people that maybe is 3 or 4 steps down the chain of what you're doing, right? You might just be
Right.
one part of an assembly line of a product, but it might be a
Hmm.
product that actually is doing good in the world. It might be
Right.
something like, wow, let me get up over the wall and see what's actually
Hmm.
happening here. It might be bad. Like, hey, you know what? Like, I'm not really adding value, but it doesn't align with my values. So you're making changes based on that.
Yeah,
But
that's a good point. Yeah.
these ideas, you might say, you know what? Like, I'm feeling stuck with my job and my career. I have an idea that I can change that, whether it be a personal, I change my role, or
Hmm.
I can maybe change the direction of the company in a small little way to maybe reorient it back onto a path that's going to lead to greater good,
Right.
or more profit if that's your motivator.
Hmm.
So I think that mentality of finding the joy or finding the meaning behind what you're doing can really help a lot of people because like it doesn't, not every job, not every project has to be this undying passion.
Hmm.
Mhm. Yeah.
It can be good enough, right?
Right.
Hey, like
Right.
this job doesn't fill my soul, but it puts food on my table and a roof over my head, and
Hmm.
I have a good enough life that it enables me to go skateboarding for 2 hours every day. Or so I keep going back to skateboarding, but like
Yeah.
I get to, I could funnel a little bit of the money I make from this day job into funding a self-published novel that gets on
Right.
Amazon, and you never know where that's going
Yes.
to go.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's like you're
So
investing in yourself at that point.
yes.
Yes,
I love that.
absolutely.
So I think it's telling people don't think of it in these grand scheme projects, but I think the little day to day stuff is actually where a lot of people get, like, goes back to what we said before about like what might stop you from doing these things. I think
Hmm.
it's that feeling like you're in that kind of rut, or there's not finding joy in the mundane sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that makes
Yeah.
sense. That's a good last thought or final message. Find the good in the mundane. I like
Yeah.
it. It's
And
a good
to
takeaway, I should
prioritize
say.
your happiness probably over all else. And as long as it's not putting people at a financial, honestly, you have to like counterbalance the harm effect, but your happiness should be your primary concern. It does bleed over into every area of your life. People, when
Hmm.
you're working with them, can tell that, oh man, he's really unhappy. He's producing great work, but he's there's something going on. Like, so happiness is core to, you know,
Well, happiness flows
everything.
around you too, right?
Yeah.
It's making sure that what your goals are. Like, yeah, maybe it takes 2 years to create this project, where the actual time it takes is maybe 1,000 hours, right? You can get
Hmm.
that done in a couple of months if you really put everything into it. But then if your kids haven't showered in 3 weeks, DC, oh, I
Yeah.
guess here in the States, right? We have the Department of Children and Families, like, you're getting arrested now. Like, it's gonna put. So
Yeah.
you have
Wow.
to find a balance that makes sense too for where you are in life.
Right.
Yeah.
But
Other
that those
things
are
shouldn't
resources.
suffer. Yeah.
Goes back to the time thing we talked about.
Yeah. And if you put too much time into one category, everything suffers. So the balance is good. Um, like sleep versus like all things else. Like, did you, I think I told you, Rui, but did I tell you, Chris, that like, there's like I think I heard it on an Andrew Huberman podcast where he said that if you're not moving to a different position, not position as in standing and sitting, but if you're not going upstairs for a walk into different like settings, sceneries and stuff, like human beings go into preservation as opposed to growth. So like I just went to Starbucks the other day. I was like, I'm loving it. I'm in flow quick. And I'm like, I'm moving around, not like a scatterbrained like thing, but just, okay, it's been, 3 hours. Let's change the background and let's go work outside, or let's just,
Well,
yeah.
no, sorry, not to cut you off. I mean, environment plays a huge role here. I know we're trying to wrap up here, but I'd love to go on this little tangent, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's this great book. I'll give you the links. You put in the show notes, but it's called The Extended Mind, and it really talks about how like people have built spaces for certain types of thoughts or actions or tasks or creation. Again, both creative and for actually getting things done. Like the whole open office plan, right? Like how it's kind of an abject failure in a lot of ways. Like there's a lot of what people thought was good, but the actual proof is in the pudding. Like, so giving yourself different kinds of spaces and contexts, there's a reason the man cave BS, right? Like there's a reason why we might want to like be in a certain space to do a certain type of work.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're getting stuck or not feeling the creative mojo, or you might be at I go back to skateboarding, right? Like certain parks might not have a scene where you feel like you're having fun, but it might be going back to a dark alley where you got like a a curb you can grind or something.
Exactly.
I haven't skateboarded since in college, so you know
Yeah.
what I mean. Like find the joy in it for you, but it can be environmental too, and it might just be a matter of getting up and going to Starbucks and doing that project and having a space that's dedicated.
Yeah. And if you're stuck and you have that tunnel vision, best thing you can do, I found, is don't work on it. Like go for a walk. It's so easy, Rui, to get into that bear down tight.
Absolutely,
I'm going to work on it till I produce that. But like if you're stuck on something, you just got to like let it go and you go for a walk. And then you'd be walking and you'd be like, I'm so happy I'm not doing that. And you're like, oh my God, I got it. It's that space that just makes everything like it's hard to do and easy to say. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We would love to have you back because there's so many different ideas to pick your brain about. And Chris, his podcast is Chris will
Deal with it. Yeah.
Deal with it. And it's on all different podcasting platforms. And thank you so much. And appreciate it. Rui, thank you.
Thank you guys.
Thanks for having me on. This is awesome.